Hello, everyone. We're going to start up in about another minute. Let a few more attendees join us, and then we'll begin. Well, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are in the country. I'd like to welcome you to the Dashe and Thomson Best Practice Series. This is where we share some of our experiences around important topics that we think can benefit the L&D community, with the goal that you can take and apply them directly in your organization. I'm Colin Smith, CEO at Dashe and Thomson, and today we are speaking on design thinking and its use in learning programs. I think you'll find this very interesting and a relevant topic for our industry, and how using this approach can improve the effectiveness of your learning initiatives. You'll hear from Sarah Bougie, our Director of Business Development, and Jolene Rowan, our CLO and EVP of Client Solutions, and who is presenting today's topic. Thank you for joining us, and with that, I'll hand it over to Sarah.
Hi, everyone. Throughout the presentation today, you will be on mute on your phone lines. If you have any questions or experience any issues, please submit the question through the chat portal on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll be dedicating some time at the end of the presentation today to answer your questions, and if we happen to miss any, we'll be sure to follow up with you directly with those as well. This webinar is also being recorded today. At the end of it, we will be distributing the recording to everyone who's attending. And then we'll also be having some interactive poll questions throughout the presentation today. Those should pop up automatically on your screen, and please just click your answer and that will officially submit to us. With that, I'll hand it over to Jolene to get started.
Great. Greetings, everyone. As Connell and Sarah just stated, we're thrilled that you've chosen to spend some time with us today to explore why learning and development professionals must care about design thinking. I've been wrestling with this concept a lot as experts at organizations like IDEO, Harvard Business Review, and others tout that design thinking has become a core competency for business success. In their book, Innovation by Design, Lockwood and Papke describe how organizations who adopt design thinking foster much more meaningful innovation and customer experiences. And as L&D professionals, that's what we're all about. So bottom line, I was convinced that design thinking is a top strategic business priority. And so, without fully understanding how it applies to instructional design, I added the term design thinking to my instructional design vocabulary and proceeded to impress my colleagues with rhetoric. But the idea of design thinking kept tugging at me like a precocious little child saying, "Hey, pay attention to me." I'm important. You don't quite understand me yet. And then finally, I knew I had to get to the bottom of why I was distracted by this topic more than any other L&D trend out there. And intuitively, I sensed that somehow I already owned this, that design thinking was not far off from what I was already doing as an instructional designer. And one day the light bulb went on, and the abstract concept of design thinking solidified for me. And I thought, wow, this is all about focusing on the human elements, what people want and need as they go about their days. Design thinking really is day in the life thinking, and that made sense to me. Brought this abstract idea of design thinking to life, and I get it. And then I quickly discovered that with a few tweaks to my processes and a few good templates, I was able to dig beyond the surface to engage and empathize and create more meaningful solutions. Honestly, I found that the key is empathy. And empathy is where the design thinking, or like I like to say, the day in the life thinking begins. And today we're going to provide an overview of each of these steps: empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. But we'll look most closely at empathy, as that really is the catalyst toward more meaningful learning solutions. So let's practice by empathizing with Matt. Imagine that Matt is a brand new sales and customer service rep. He's just started working in the call center, going through his new hire training, and he's shadowing right now. Matt is seeing, and we all know that his days are soon to be packed with back-to-back customer questions, for which he'll need a wide range of knowledge. And he'll need to articulate all of this information in a meaningful way to his customers. And again, as we know, often while de-escalating these conversations. Now imagine that you're Matt's manager. Do you need your new phone reps to remember how to log call information? Of course you do. But that's probably not going to happen because new hires receive that information once during an e-learning that is tucked away on the LMS. Well, what about plan and product information? Matt and colleagues like him took several courses, and he aced everyone, but that was days ago, and the details are in various brochures and PowerPoint decks in SharePoint and other crazy places. And Matt has to fight the instinct to fight, flee, or freeze several times a day, making it difficult to access his frontal lobe. Oh, and for certain, training did not cover how to deal with that. In fact, here's what his new hire program looks like. Okay. As you can see, his schedule is filled with chunks of product training, followed by a series of systems training and customer service training and compliance courses with some quizzes and observations sprinkled in. And it looks like the first time he gets to practice for real is Thursday afternoon during some role plays. And we all know how we love role plays. It's a plan packed with information, but little integrated action-based learning. So I want you to think for a moment, and Sarah's going to start up a poll here. If you were tasked with finding a solution or solutions to this curriculum problem, what might you do? Go ahead and click your poll. Great. Seeing somewhat of a balance between mobile, gamification, and virtual, but most of you are thinking micro-learning is the way to go. No one selected, 4% selected instructor-led training. Very interesting. So the real key here is, and this was a trick question, to not jump to solutions or the new bright shiny object immediately. And I know that in search for more meaningful approaches, we're often tempted to turn to a trend or technology like gamification or virtual reality simulations or augmented reality, thinking one of these must be the thing that our approach is missing. And certainly these modes can be useful and are useful, but only after we've done the work to identify the root cause of the problem. We have to remember that training is not always the solution to the problem. And honestly, we need to face the problem as our learners would. In other words, we need to face the problem as Matt would. Then and only then can we create meaningful solutions that use the right mix of tools and technology. And that's where design thinking is crucial. And look, Matt's looking happy now. We're going to use design thinking to fix his curriculum. Okay. So on our agenda for the rest of this hour is to define design thinking and take a look at how we can put it to work in our training design. And as I mentioned earlier, we're going to focus a lot on empathy, gaining empathy. Then we'll look at what might get in the way. And at the end, we'll have a few minutes to take some questions. So let's get started. Design thinking is essentially the practice of considering the human element in design and being rigorous about considering that human element. And as it turns out, the practice of considering the human element in design is not new. And in fact, it originated in 1969 and became known as the human-centered design approach in the 90s. So it's been around for a while. And really, since the late 60s, this process has been used to design consumer products, software solutions, and actually to solve some pretty massive human problems. Why now for learning and development? Well, Josh Burson, an L&D researcher and strategic advisor, for one, finds that learning and development arrived at this need back in 2017. He stresses that L&D must focus on experience design and design thinking to create relevant learning experiences. And he adds that these experiences have to extend into the flow of work. Okay? And that's where design thinking comes in, because we walk a day in the life of our learners. He and other experts in this industry insist that instructional designers must also be experience designers. So we move from ID by adding and augmenting our professional capabilities and skills with EX. And how do we do this? Well, do we scrap our tried and true processes like ADDIE and Bloom's and situated cognitive learning and SAM? No, not so fast. We don't scrap those. And that was the big aha moment for me. And that was realizing that design thinking doesn't replace instructional design. Rather, it enhances instructional design. And at Dashe and Thomson, we like to think about our model in these three buckets: design, develop, deploy. And it's really in this design phase that we apply design thinking mostly, and that's where we start to establish empathy, dig deeper, and go beyond to find solutions that get at the root cause. And again, it all starts with empathy. As Paul Backett states, he's an early pioneer of design thinking, great designers are great empathizers. What separates a design that has soul from one that's simply well realized. And I love that he uses the word soul. We'll make our design learning opportunities that have soul using our design thinking or day in the life thinking processes. What I'd like to share next is a little bit of the how. And we're going to start by looking at some tools. And we're going to look at empathy tools in specific. So the 3 tools that I find very helpful in gaining empathy with learners are empathy maps and learner personas and day in the life or journey maps. And I found that there are some prescribed ways in which you should use these, but really I found that it doesn't matter what order you use them in, or necessarily that you use them all, but that you find which tools work for you and you use them. Really what matters is that you create and use them and update them, especially in times of change. All right, so again, before we dig into these tools, I would like just to quickly poll the group to see which of these you have experience using to date. So Sarah's opened up the poll again. Go ahead and select. That's awesome. So we are really seeing the use of several of these, with learner personas really being kind of the most widely used within this group, and empathy maps maybe being the least widely used, and another set of others out there. So, thank you for sharing. And as I'll state a little bit later in this webinar, I'd love to continue this conversation afterwards and get your perspectives on how you're using these tools. And know that if you haven't started using these tools yet, that a lot of L&D professionals haven't. L&D really is still in the early adopter phase, but you're getting there, and that's great. So I would like to start by taking a look at day in the life or journey maps. When tackling a learning problem, this is a place where I often start. And here is a journey map that I've created for our fictitious learner, Matt. And I like to start even before his workday starts and extend beyond where his workday ends, because as we know, a lot of people are actually checking in on email and their calendars and other things before and after. And what happens before they arrive at work can often impact how their day goes. So to gather this data, I would usually do structured interviews and observations with employees and their supervisors, or I would facilitate a focus group and walk through and whiteboard a typical day. I actually find that the process of drawing helps elevate the thinking process. And there are studies actually that show drawing does elevate the thinking process. So as much as possible, I think it's good to draw and gain insights that way. And then creating journey maps like this really gives me a solid framework upon which to continue collecting data and exploring our learners' thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Really gives us kind of a common ground and a common vernacular for talking about the day in the life. And then next, the empathy maps really help synthesize observations. As I conduct interviews and observe learners, I also collect data and oftentimes direct quotes that reflect how a learner is thinking and feeling and how those thoughts and feelings affect their behavior. This really is designed to capture the essence of the learner's day. And then synthesizing on that data in an empathy map like that helps me really dig beyond the surface and draw out deeper meaning. And also to draw out insights that get to, or help me get to the root cause of problems. So let's give this a try. Okay. And this is not a poll, and it's not a question that you answer on your computer, but what I'd like you to do is take a few minutes to imagine that you are an instructional designer interviewing and observing Matt to gather some data insights about his goals, his thoughts, his feelings, his actions, his needs, his frustrations, whatever it might be. And I'd like you to write down one or two things that you think Matt might be feeling, thinking, or saying. Okay? And I really want you to do this. I can't see you, but I'm hoping that you will take a moment to jot down a couple of things. Great. So now, let's look at what that might look like on an empathy map. And I imagine you might have jotted down some things like, ambition. Matt really wants to meet his goals. He likes to be seen as the expert, and he's eager for that to happen. He might be frustrated. There's way too much to memorize. He might be feeling some disappointment. Maybe he won't have all the answers, and he's really expecting that he will based on his background in school and previous jobs. Oh, and wow, his headphones are also a problem. Okay, so these are all things that are going to affect how Matt shows up to learn. And certainly training is not going to solve all of these issues. There's no way. And that's where day in the life design thinking will help us discover root causes and apply the right solutions. We're going to look at one more empathy tool, and then we're going to move into root cause analysis. Okay. So our final empathy tool is a journey map, a learner persona map. And this really will be the augmentation of all of the data that we've collected so far. And a learner persona provides a one-page snapshot of our target learners. Okay. So this is a fictitious, this is meant to be a fictitious persona and will be used to help us design a learning program for learners like Matt, but not specifically for Matt. Okay. And here is a template that I've used, and this really helps me organize the data into meaningful categories. Okay. And here's what a completed persona for our new hire training redesign assignment might look. So you can see that we've created a fictitious name. It's kind of fun to have the name sort of match, the actual personas. So Leon Learner. We've indicated some key demographics that differentiate this learner from other learners who might also be going through new hire training. So in this case, we're looking at learners who are millennials, single, kind of live in the city, have a BA, maybe their second job out of college, and et cetera. Okay. So this persona, along with the journey and empathy maps, will effectively drive the rest of our design thinking process. So after collecting and analyzing data in the empathize phase, the next step is to define the problem. And the key to defining problems accurately is to pinpoint root causes and needs. And here is our root cause analysis framework. It really addresses problems from a whole learner perspective, head, heart, and hands. And each of these problems and underlying root causes will lead to a variety of solutions, depending upon whether the gaps are in understanding, belief, or motivation, or skill. So after root cause analysis, then I define the problem in clear statements and performance goals based on real business drivers. Then we move into ideate. Okay. And we're going to move into this phase to show how that root cause analysis framework works when we're ideating on solutions. Like I said, during ideate, you need to consider a wide range of possible solutions. So is the problem a lack of knowledge? If so, you need to determine if the learner needs to recall the information instantaneously or if they need ready reference. For recall, then flashcards, memorization might be the best tool. If the need is readily accessible reference material, then that's the solution you need to build, and you might need to train your learners how to use the tool. Maybe the root cause of a performance problem is a lack of belief or motivation. In that case, the solution is not likely training. Unless the root cause is low confidence in performing a task, then it might be a skill issue, which moves us into the lack of skill bucket, for which training can be the solution. But if we're in the lack of belief or motivation bucket, your learners need evidence. So storytelling, testimonials, key messaging, not training, is going to help. And then if it truly is lack of skill, then that's where training may be the answer. Certainly practice and coaching can be part of the solution too. In any case, the important message here, and of course for us to deliver to our stakeholders, is that workforce problems are complex and often require solutions that go beyond what training can provide. And this is where things like reflecting, sketching, brainstorming, affinity diagrams help. And in some cases you can do that alone, but depending upon the complexity of the problem, you may need to ideate with a larger group. After empathize, define, and ideate come prototype and test. During prototyping, this is where you create simple, inexpensive models of the solution, or if you're just developing one, like e-learning module, let's say, that's the solution, maybe just a key activity or two from that e-learning module. These are often called minimum viable products, and then you test those with your learners. And during the testing phase, you have learners actually walk through the solution that you've developed or prototyped and watch them, interview them, so that you can gain information about their thoughts, their feelings, their behaviors, their actions. Then you go back and improve the prototype if necessary and test again. But if you've done a thorough job on empathize, define, and ideate, the chance of scrapping an entire idea at this phase is low. And in my experience, you can really expect no more than about 2 to 3 iterations if you've done your work well before nailing it. So that is a brief overview of design thinking, or day in the life thinking for learning and development professionals, with a deeper dive in the first few steps. The remaining steps will be the subject of an upcoming webinar where we'll look at the tools involved in those steps a little more closely. So I'd like to return to Matt for a moment and our new hire training problem. Remember his new hire training schedule? Let's assume that we have been given the problem to revamp this new hire training. And it's part of a strategic effort to help solve new employee turnover, which is at 40% right now. 40% of our employees turnover within the first 6 months. And believe it or not, we've seen those problems. The corporate goal, the strategic goal, is to reduce that rate to 20% in 19. Okay. So if we adopt a day-in-the-life thinking approach or design thinking approach, we have a greater opportunity to be strategic advisors in meeting this goal and contributors to driving that goal to reduce employee turnover. And with a design thinking approach, Matt's learning journey might look something like this. It starts with a day-in-the-life walkthrough, instilling in Matt an understanding of his role and his contributions to the company. This is where we want to engage Matt's heart, get him to buy in what's in it for him. This is where we use self-study and facilitated sessions, stories, testimonials. Okay. Then this design synthesizes product, system, and process content together in real-life scenarios that Matt will commonly face. And that gives him a chance to practice real-life tasks in a risk-free environment with scaffolding, a reference tool that he's learning to use, some coaching and feedback. And it ensures that these reference tools actually exist, and it teaches Matt how to use those tools. And it provides memory devices for the content he simply must memorize. And as you can see going along, this design recognizes that Matt might benefit from learning some self-awareness and negotiation skills. And it provides that content for both Matt and his manager. This design saves more advanced and enrichment topics for later after Matt feels proficient in the basics. Really, it's a learning design that is empathetic to Matt's learning needs now and into the future. And it's a design that moves the right learning content from formal events to self-study and learning on the job, saving both time and money. So next, I'd like to share a couple of real-life examples that highlight real outcomes using a design thinking approach. In this first example, we partnered with a financial services company to evaluate their analyst new hire program. And this new analysts were hired and brought into a rotation that was also part of a leadership development program. And the goal was to design a robust learning program to replace their one-week in-person program that was delivered mostly by subject matter experts. The content was there, the format needed to be revamped, and the client was very interested in e-learning or digital learning. So taking a design thinking approach, we met with prior learners, analysts on the job, their managers, and the facilitators who facilitated the one-week in-person program. And we started by outlining a new hire's typical day. What we discovered were some competency themes in a new hire's path to proficiency around gaining insights, handling client calls, and then using the tools. And much like our fictitious example, we designed a learning program around those themes placed in learning tracks that took place over time. And each track included modules and reference material and scaffolding, starting with the basics and working up to more complex ideas or concepts. And each module included real-life scenarios delivered in a logical flow to allow for practice and retention. Additionally, we designed the learning modules to be transportable and flexible, adaptable to the learner, because these learners, these new analysts, would go through rotations, and it was never the same rotation and flow for every single learner. So the modules needed to be transportable and flexible to fit into what their rotation, each individual rotation, was going to look like. So with this approach, new hires and their managers could see a clear path and timeline to competence and have the tools to get there. In the second example, we partnered with the Sexual Violence Justice Institute, which is a national sexual assault advocacy organization. It's headquartered here in St. Paul. And the goal was to design and develop a curriculum aimed at helping sexual assault response teams. And these teams are typically composed of a variety of roles, including health professionals, advocates, advocacy groups, law enforcement officials. During the design phase, we knew we were going to develop some e-learning and maybe some video, but we discovered that each role has some preconceived ideas about the other roles within the response team. Advocates had some preconceived notions about law enforcement officials and vice versa, which immediately invoked some cognitive bias barriers. So to help solve for those barriers and the resulting behaviors, we designed a set of archetype cards that teams could use together when they're starting up, when they're learning, the process and ongoing activities. We designed one card per team member role that describes their role and responsibilities on the team, as well as their strengths and challenges. And then each member of a START team receives a full set of these cards. Our client has since reported the popularity of these cards within the START teams and the benefits achieved with more empathetic and collaborative working relationships. So we've looked at what design thinking is, how it can work, have discussed evidence that shows that it works. But without doubt, there are challenges to applying design thinking and achieving some of these outcomes that we just saw. So let's look at some of the things that might get in the way. The biggie is awareness and buy-in on our own part, right? Like me, I accepted that it was important, but only superficially. It takes more than rhetoric to make this work and to achieve those outcomes. And it's far too easy to write this off as an impossible task or dismiss it as another trendy buzzword, or to avoid it entirely, assuming that it's going to take more time and money. But that's simply not the case. And I like, as the saying goes, measuring twice and cutting once saves time and money, and that's what design thinking is, or day in the life thinking is. And truly, it saves time and money in the long run. There's also many common shortcuts or pitfalls that lurk for L&D practitioners, and we've all experienced some of these. It's easy to make assumptions about what the learner wants and needs without actually talking to them. Far too easy to focus only on the technology. The technology is the solution, and we just need to teach people how to use the technology and not focusing on the people or the processes. And then finally, doing whatever's most convenient. It's easy to do whatever's most convenient. For example, mandating that all corporate learning must be housed on the LMS, or that all online learning materials have to be created with a single IT-approved software tool, okay, regardless of the need. But we can overcome these shortcuts and pitfalls. And really, I think the key is to pay attention to what I hope will now be tugging at you, and that's design thinking or day in the life thinking. So finally, let's summarize what we've covered in this webinar, and then we're going to move to questions. So the discipline of design thinking or day in the life thinking has a great deal to offer the learning and development community. And I believe that we are well poised to bring this competence to bear in our learning organizations, but across our organizations as a whole. We get it, we get how to do this, we just have to improve our processes to include design thinking. In this webinar, we've provided an overview of the what, why, and how. And now I encourage you to broaden your view of learning and development and embrace the philosophy and steps and tools of design thinking to take your problem-solving skills to a new level. Design thinking gives us the best chance at delivering meaningful solutions and honestly claiming a seat at the strategy table. So thank you so much for your time today. I would love to continue the conversation with you. Please contact me at any time. So now I'm going to turn the mic back to Sarah to explain how to get some downloads from today's webinar and to facilitate our question and answer time.
Thanks, Jolene. So we've developed some tried and true tools to share with you today. We have 2 templates available for download and for you to follow. One is for an empathy map and one is for a learner persona. And we've also included our performance improvement roadmap. As a part of our follow-up to all attendees today, we will be sending you a link to download these directly, or you can find them right now under our resources section at www.dashe.com. That's DASHE.com. We'll send you the link, or you can go to our resources section right now to get them. And it looks like we still have a few minutes left to answer some questions. If you haven't already, please submit any questions you might have through the chat portal. And if we run out of time and don't get to yours, we'll be sure to follow up with you directly as well. So we'll give you a couple seconds here to submit those. All right, and ones are coming in here. So Jolene, the first question is, what are some of the best techniques for getting empathy data?
Yes, that's a great question, and it focuses on the right spot, collecting empathy data. So like I explained a little bit in that section, really, I mean, you have to go right to the learner. And the best learners to go to are those that have recently gone through maybe a training that you're revamping, or if it's if training is happening as part of a large scale change, you know, attending user acceptance testing, or some of the steps that are taking place as part of that change, and taking notes and asking questions. And in either of these situations, whether you're observing a learner or involved in a large-scale change and collecting data, the most important questions are the 5 W's. What are you thinking about this process? What's getting in your way? Why, or, kind of what's at the bottom of your frustration? So really just asking those questions. What else do we have there?
Great. The next one is, does this model fit in well with an agile methodology?
Yes, absolutely. And oftentimes people confuse design thinking with agile. They're not the same, but design thinking fits very well within an agile process. The trick is, especially for learning and development professionals, is to figure out the design thinking process within an agile sprint, because that will indicate how much time you have to spend on design versus develop versus deploy. But absolutely, design thinking fits very well within an agile process.
Great. The next one is, could you give some tips for how to map design thinking to an ID process like ADDIE or SAM?
Yes, some tips. Okay. The biggest tip, I think, is really in the project management space, figuring out how to ensure that you are allowing enough time from project kickoff to development of the first draft of your deliverable or deliverables. And depending upon the size of your project, whether it's one learning deliverable or 50, will determine how much time you're going to need in that upfront design phase. We find that from kickoff to really producing, let's say, our first script or storyboard takes about 2 weeks. And so baking that into your project, having your project managers bake that into your project, and setting expectations with the team, both your development team as well as your client team, whether it's an internal client or external client, is essential. So I think that's the biggest tip, is getting your project management brain around this.
Great. From a timing perspective, if you have a very short timeline, what's the best timeline for an effective design thinking process for a medium-sized project about 400 impacted people?
Great. These are great questions. So, again, you need to go through a design process that involves collecting data from your learners. And honestly, I think that can take anywhere from 2 weeks to 6 to 8 weeks, depending upon the size of the project. Now, the questioner talks about a timeline that probably doesn't allow for 8 weeks. So, at a minimum, I think you need about 2 weeks to work something like this into your process. And I believe you can do it even if you have a learning audience of 400 people.
What are some tips when you find that learners or groups of learners are different from each other and require different things for learning and adopting?
Yes, then you have more than one persona. And what you do is you start to collect data from your learners, and that's where you start to discern these differences and differentiators. And you have to identify what are the key things that separates these learners. And it's not easy, but it can be done, and we've done it. In fact, we're doing it with a client right now, where we have a hierarchy of descriptors that gets us to the place where we know we have 4 personas, 4 generic kind of personas that we have to consider when building out our learning materials. Some very common ones in a learning solution are the most obvious, and that's it could either be director, manager, frontline worker. Those would be 3 different personas, or someone who reviews versus enters data.
Great. And then could you expand a bit more on lack of knowledge versus lack of skill?
Yes, so lack of knowledge would be more around just knowing, for example, what products are available, or knowing how to do, I'm trying to think of something that might be relevant, knowing about educational psychology, but how do I apply that? Applying it would be skill, following a process to get some work done. Understanding the principles of accounting, would be knowledge, versus knowing how to do accounting, following the processes for a specific company.
Great. Thanks, everyone, for all of your great questions. Really helpful for us. Like I mentioned, if you have any that pop up in your mind after the webinar today, please let us know. We're happy to follow up with you directly. We have a few exciting events coming up here at Dashe in Thomson. Next week, we'll be exhibiting at the National DevLearn Conference in Vegas. If you're planning on attending as well, please be sure to come visit us at booth 724. And if you enjoyed our webinar today, please consider joining us for our next one in our Best Practices series. titled Lights, Camera, Interaction, The Power and Possibilities of Video in Learning Solutions, which will be on December 13th. We want to thank you all again for joining us today. If you have any follow-up questions or would like to speak with us more, all of my contact information is there on the screen. As a quick reminder, we're a full-service learning and development consulting firm that specializes in custom training solutions and change management, and we're certainly happy to connect with you on anything we can do to help with your initiatives. And with that, we'll log off for today. Thank you all again, and have a wonderful day.